Did not realize the scope and scale of this thing would be. And we had 2 sets constantly shooting, sometimes with thousands of extras on each. To stay in control of that in real arduous conditions that's a feat.
Any Troy fanatics here? 2 decades have gone, and fans thought they had Troy all figured out. Brad Pitt's brooding Achilles, the sweeping battles, the epic drama. What more was there to know? Apparently, everything. In a recent, unexpected reveal, Pitt dropped a truth bomb that's rewriting how we see one of Hollywood's most ambitious historical films. What he finally confessed about Troy, 2004, isn't just surprising. It's the kind of behind-the-scenes twist that changes everything you thought you knew. What Brad Pitt finally said about Troy. For years, Troy existed in that strange space between blockbuster fame and critical indifference. It wasn't a flop by any means, grossing nearly $500 million worldwide, but it never quite reached the classic status it aimed for. And while audiences remember the sweeping battles and striking visuals, the man at the center of it all, Brad Pitt, had been relatively quiet about his experience playing Achilles. Until now. In a candid recent interview, Pitt finally opened up about what really happened behind the scenes of Troy, and what he revealed caught even longtime fans off guard. Truthfully, I didn't love it. I was disappointed in what it became, Pitt said. I went in with a different idea of what it was going to be. Somewhere along the way, it turned into something else. That alone is a pretty striking admission, especially coming from an A-lister who's been known to speak carefully about his work. But he didn't stop there. Pitt explained that he originally took the role of Achilles because he was fascinated by the complexity of the character, not just the warrior legend, but the flawed, almost petulant figure from Greek myth. He wanted to explore Achilles as a man torn between fate, ego, and morality. Instead, he said, the final product leaned too heavily into spectacle. I wanted Achilles to be dangerous but also broken. In the original vision, he wasn't just a hero, he was kind of a mess. There was something more internal, more human. Pitt hinted that much of that nuance was stripped out during production. According to him, the studio pushed hard for Troy to be an accessible action film. And while the film definitely delivered on swords and sandals, Pitt felt it lost the psychological depth he was hoping to explore. This frustration didn't just come out of nowhere. If you look back at that period in Pitt's career, Troy came right after a string of riskier, more character-driven projects like Fight Club and Snatch. Pitt was clearly in a place where he wanted to stretch as an actor. So when Troy became more about polished muscle and wide shots than introspection and nuance, it left a mark. There was a moment, mid-shoot, where I realized, this isn't the story I signed up for, he admitted. The shoot itself was notoriously intense. Filming on location in Malta and Mexico under grueling conditions, combined with the physical demands of playing a nearly mythic warrior, created a pressure cooker environment. Pitt reportedly trained for 6 months prior to production, learning sword fighting, bulking up, and perfecting Achilles' specific fighting style, all of which he now sees as part of the problem. It became all about the body, the image. And sure, I was proud of the physical work, but I wasn't proud of the character work, he said. This might explain why Pitt rarely mentioned Troy in interviews over the years. While other stars looked back fondly on their time in the film, Pitt kept it at arm's length until now. In fact, his comments were so rare that Troy often felt like a forgotten detour in his otherwise daring filmography. What's fascinating is how his comments have already started to reshape how fans see the movie. Within days of the interview, social media lit up with clips and analysis threads digging back through the film for hints of the version Pitt originally envisioned. Was Achilles meant to be more tortured? Were there scenes cut that showed deeper layers of his personality? Some fans pointed to the quieter moments: Achilles brooding alone in his tent, his relationship with Briseis, his almost nihilistic confrontation with death, as evidence that Pitt was trying to infuse more character into the role. It's just that, in the final edit, those moments were overshadowed by the grander visuals. Ironically, that disconnect between performance and production has made some viewers appreciate the film even more. Knowing what Pitt was going for adds a new lens and perhaps a new appreciation for the work he did manage to get on screen, despite the film's broader direction. It also opens up a larger conversation about how studio-driven epics are made. Pitt's comments reflect the common tension between an actor's artistic goals and the commercial needs of a $185 million movie. And in this case, the star power of Brad Pitt might not have been enough to preserve the original vision. Still, Pitt doesn't seem bitter. Reflective, yes, but not resentful. It taught me something about what I want from a role, about control, too, how little of it you really have sometimes. And maybe that's why he's finally speaking out now. With distance and with perspective, and with a long list of bold choices in his rearview mirror, Brad Pitt can finally put Troy in its proper place. A turning point. But what exactly was Brad Pitt's vision for Achilles beneath the armor and battle cries? How did he approach this iconic figure in a way that audiences hadn't seen before? Achilles as you've never seen him. If you go back and rewatch Troy with fresh eyes, especially after Brad Pitt's recent revelations, you'll notice something interesting. Beneath the grand battles and sweeping orchestral cues, there's a quieter, more subtle performance fighting to break through. This wasn't just a muscular warrior charging into battle. Pitt was aiming for something deeper, something more fragile. A version of Achilles the audience wasn't quite ready for in 2004, and most people missed it. When Pitt first signed on for Troy, he wasn't just drawn to the action. He was fascinated by the contradictions in Achilles' character. In Homer's Iliad, Achilles isn't a clean-cut hero. He's prideful, impulsive, even vengeful. He refuses to fight, lets his comrades die, and only rejoins the war to avenge his fallen friend. Pitt saw a psychological goldmine in that and wanted to tap into it. He described Achilles as having a sense of internal rot, portraying a man who was supposed to be the greatest warrior alive, but didn't even want to be there. That internal conflict was what interested him most. You can see traces of that intention throughout the film, if you're looking closely. Achilles moves with calculated detachment. He often speaks in a quiet, almost tired tone. In moments where most action heroes would shout or rage, Pitt underplays it. For example, when Achilles confronts Agamemnon or tells Briseis he has no interest in the gods, there's a weariness in his delivery that suggests a man who sees through all of it: the war, the politics, the posturing. But here's the catch. That subtlety didn't stand a chance against the scale of the production. In a film where everything else was turned up to 11, the massive sets, the dramatic score, the cast of hundreds, Pitt's intentionally restrained performance was easy to overlook. Still, his choices were deliberate. Pitt reportedly worked closely with dialect coaches and physical trainers, not just to perfect the way Achilles looked and moved, but to shape the way he carried his pain. Achilles walks with supreme confidence, yes, but also a sense of distance. There's no joy in his victories, no thrill in his duels. It's all mechanical, ritualistic, like someone going through the motions of being legendary. Pitt often asked himself what happens when you're done being a god, and what that does to a person's soul. One of the most telling examples of Pitt's layered portrayal comes in his interactions with Briseis, played by Rose Byrne. Their relationship in the film is strange, intense, quiet, emotionally charged, but intentionally uncomfortable. Achilles doesn't treat her with cruelty, but neither does he know how to express actual affection. He's fascinated by her, but he's also confused by his own vulnerability. In those scenes, Pitt lets the mask slip just a little. And what you see underneath is not power, it's loneliness. According to cast and crew, Pitt was deeply invested in those moments. He pushed for more screen time between Achilles and Briseis, believing that their connection was one of the only humanizing threads in Achilles' arc. Many of those scenes were trimmed or rewritten during editing. Another subtle detail Pitt added was the way Achilles reacts to the concept of honor. While other characters in the film talk about glory, legacy, and the favor of the gods, Achilles remains skeptical. He questions everything, even as he leads men into battle. This too was intentional. Pitt saw Achilles not as a believer, but as someone who'd already lost faith. He explained that Achilles had already lived the legend, already heard the songs, and was, in a sense, over it. That sort of layered performance can easily go unnoticed in a film like Troy, where so much is happening visually and narratively. But once you know what Pitt was trying to do, it becomes clear that he was fighting for a very different version of Achilles, one that felt more like a real man caught in a myth, rather than the myth himself. And maybe that's why Pitt's recent comments hit so hard, because now we understand. He wasn't phoning it in. He wasn't distracted or disconnected. In fact, he was doing the opposite, trying to ground one of the most legendary figures in history in real psychological truth. It just got drowned out by everything around him. The other Troy, what the film was supposed to be. The story of Troy, 2004, is as epic off-screen as it is on-screen, and Brad Pitt's recent revelations pull back the curtain on just how different this epic was meant to be. Before the swords clashed and the cameras rolled, the film had a much darker, more intimate vision, one that would have deeply explored the psychological complexities of its characters, especially Achilles. Originally, the script was drafted with a much stronger focus on the moral ambiguity and the emotional consequences of war. Early versions aimed to portray the Trojan War not just as a spectacle of heroism, but as a brutal, tragic, and deeply human conflict. Achilles was supposed to be a deeply flawed anti-hero, a warrior battling inner demons as much as external enemies. Brad Pitt signed on precisely because this vision promised a more nuanced and introspective character. He wanted to portray Achilles as someone wrestling with existential questions. What does it mean to be a hero? How do pride and vengeance shape a man's fate? Could glory be worth the cost of losing your soul? However, as filming progressed, Pitt and many others began to notice a divergence between this original ambitious intent and the demands coming from the studio. Legend has it that Warner Brothers, aiming to maximize box office appeal, pushed for a more traditional, crowd-pleasing action epic. The emphasis shifted toward large-scale battles, sweeping romance, and spectacular visual effects, elements that often left less room for the kind of deep character exploration Pitt sought. Director Wolfgang Petersen, known for his work on disaster films like Das Boot and Air Force One, was caught in the middle. On one hand, he wanted to honor the rich source material and bring a complex human story to life. On the other, studio executives pressured him to dial back some of the darker psychological themes to maintain broader accessibility. Pitt has spoken about this creative tug-of-war. There was a real struggle between the poetic and the commercial. I kept pushing for the former, but the machine was leaning the other way. This tug-of-war had tangible effects on the script and the filming process. Several key scenes that offered deeper insights into Achilles' motivations were either rewritten or cut entirely. For example, early drafts included longer, more introspective moments where Achilles grappled with his own legacy and the meaning of honor beyond battlefield glory. There were also darker undertones to his relationship with his mother, Thetis, hinting at his near-divine status and the pressures it brought. The romantic subplot with Briseis was originally planned to be far more complex, touching on themes of power, vulnerability, and identity. Pitt advocated for these layers, but the studio wanted a more straightforward love story, fearing that ambiguity might confuse or alienate viewers. Behind the scenes, Pitt reportedly felt frustrated by how the narrative kept shifting. He once joked in an interview that he felt like he was acting in 3 different movies, depending on which script version was in play that day. The production was further complicated by the massive scale and tight shooting schedules. Managing hundreds of extras, elaborate battle sequences, and exotic locations left little room for the kind of character work Pitt wanted to focus on. The enormous budget also added pressure to produce a film that would deliver spectacular visual moments and broad appeal. Interestingly, some of the cut or rewritten scenes have since surfaced in script leaks and fan discussions, adding fuel to speculation about what Troy might have been. These scenes would have given Achilles more moral complexity, showing his doubts, regrets, and moments of vulnerability that never quite made it to the big screen. Pitt's recent interview confirmed what many fans had suspected for years. The final Troy was a compromise, a mix of the visionary and the commercial. While it delivered grand visuals and iconic moments, it fell short of the intimate, psychological epic that Pitt and some of the creative team initially envisioned. This behind-the-scenes drama adds a new dimension to the film's legacy. It invites us to consider not just what Troy is, but what it could have been had the delicate balance between art and commerce tipped differently. For Brad Pitt, this creative struggle was more than just frustration, it was a defining moment. The experience shaped how he approached roles afterward, making him more selective and more determined to find projects where his artistic vision could thrive. Before we dive into Achilles' hidden depths, it's worth noting that this role almost pushed Brad Pitt to quit acting altogether. What happened behind the scenes was far more intense than anyone expected. Why Troy almost made Pitt quit acting? When you think of Brad Pitt's career, it's easy to focus on the glitz and glory, the blockbuster hits, the awards, the global fame. But behind the scenes, Troy marked a turning point, one that almost pushed Pitt to reconsider everything about his life as an actor. In his recent interview, Pitt was refreshingly honest about the emotional toll the film took on him. Far from being just another role, playing Achilles was a grueling experience that left him questioning not only the project, but his passion for acting itself. I remember feeling empty when it was over, like I'd given everything to this character and didn't get what I hoped for in return, Pitt said. It was a strange mix of exhaustion, disappointment, and honestly, doubt. That doubt wasn't just about Troy as a movie, it was about his entire career trajectory. Pitt had entered the role wanting to push boundaries, to dive deep into the psyche of a legendary figure. Instead, he felt boxed in by expectations and studio demands that reduced his complex character to a physical spectacle. The production itself added layers of strain. Filming took place in sweltering heat in Malta and remote parts of Mexico, where Pitt and the cast worked long hours in heavy costumes, armor, and makeup. The physical demands were immense, but Pitt was determined to honor the role. I trained like I'd never trained before. 6 months of sword fighting, endurance, and weight training, he recalled. My body was ready, but my mind was struggling. The mental toll came from more than just exhaustion. Pitt felt disconnected from the version of Achilles being shaped by the final script and edits. He once joked that he had no idea who I was playing by the end of shooting, a telling glimpse into his frustration. His doubts culminated in a moment of near burnout. For a while, Pitt seriously contemplated stepping away from acting entirely. The experience of Troy made him question whether the sacrifices required were worth it, especially if the art got lost in the process. "I was honestly thinking, maybe this isn't for me anymore. Maybe it's time to do something else," he admitted. But instead of quitting, Pitt chose to learn. He took the experience as a lesson in creative control and personal priorities. It made him more cautious about the projects he took on and more vocal about the kind of stories he wanted to tell. In the years following Troy, Pitt gravitated towards smaller, more challenging films, like The Assassination of Jesse James and Tree of Life, that allowed him to stretch as an actor and collaborate closely with visionary directors. "I wanted to be part of movies where my voice mattered, where the story felt personal," Pitt explained. Interestingly, this shift also led Pitt to explore producing, where he found new ways to influence the filmmaking process. His production company, Plan B Entertainment, went on to back critically acclaimed films like 12 Years, A Slave and Moonlight, both winners of Best Picture Oscars. Looking back, Troy was a catalyst. It forced Pitt to confront the realities of Hollywood and find ways to carve out more meaningful creative space for himself. Despite the disappointment, he doesn't dismiss Troy altogether. In fact, he's come to appreciate the film's impact, both on audiences and on his own growth. "It wasn't what I hoped it would be, but it was part of my journey. Sometimes, the toughest roles teach you the most." Hidden symbolism and details. Most fans never caught. When most people think of Troy, the first images that come to mind are the thunderous battles, Brad Pitt's commanding presence, and the film's sweeping dialogue. Yet beneath this grand spectacle lies a subtle web of symbolism and artistic choices that many viewers overlooked. Brad Pitt's recent revelations have shown a new light on these hidden layers, highlighting the careful craftsmanship that supports the film's epic surface. One of the most striking and often missed elements is the deliberate use of color palettes. Achilles is frequently framed against muted earth tones, grays, browns, dusty reds, that mirror his grounded, weary nature. This contrasts sharply with the brighter golds and blues adorning the Trojans, symbolizing their hope and idealism. The battle scenes themselves shift in color temperature to reflect emotional shifts. Early clashes feel cold and chaotic, emphasizing the brutal cost of war, while later sequences glow with a fiery orange haze, foreshadowing Achilles' tragic fate. Pitt worked closely with costume designers to ensure Achilles' armor was more than just protective gear. It became a worn, practical extension of the character. Unlike the ornate armor of other warriors, Achilles' gear carries scratches and dents that symbolize his inner scars and countless battles, both physical and psychological. Beyond the visuals, Pitt's quieter moments as Achilles are loaded with meaning. His long silences after violent fights aren't mere pauses. They hint at the emotional toll of war. In one memorable scene, Achilles stands alone on a hill, gazing silently over the battlefield. His expression a complex mix of detachment and deep internal struggle, caught between fate and free will. The relationship between Achilles and Briseis, played by Rose Byrne, is another layer rich with subtlety. Their charged, quiet exchanges carry an undercurrent of power and vulnerability. Scholars suggest their dynamic reflects Achilles' internal conflict, a proud warrior wrestling with suppressed emotions. Pitt and Byrne's nuanced performances elevate these moments, which mainstream reviews often overlook. For mythology buffs, Troy hides small but meaningful nods to Homer's Iliad and Greek mythology. The fleeting appearances of Thetis, Achilles' mother, hint at his semi-divine origins. The film also subtly references Achilles' heel, not just as a physical weakness, but a metaphor for emotional vulnerability, enriching the story for attentive viewers. Pitt's layered performance, combined with deliberate artistic choices, created a film that rewards multiple viewings and deeper exploration, showing a version of Achilles both mythic and profoundly human. Internet theories, debunked and confirmed by Pitt's reveal. Since Troy hit theaters in 2004, the film has inspired countless fan theories, debates, and deep dives online. From Reddit threads to YouTube analysis videos, fans have tried to piece together the true story behind the film's characters and plot choices, sometimes creating intricate theories to explain perceived inconsistencies or mysteries. Brad Pitt's recent comments have breathed new life into these discussions, confirming some fan suspicions while debunking others. Let's unpack the biggest internet theories in light of what Pitt revealed. One of the most popular theories was that Pitt's Achilles was intentionally portrayed as a tortured soul hiding behind bravado. Fans noticed his occasional quiet moments and interpreted them as signs of deep inner conflict. Pitt's admission that he wanted to play Achilles as kind of a mess confirms this theory outright. He explicitly said the character was meant to be dangerous and broken, a man battling personal demons beyond the battlefield. Many fans have speculated for years that the theatrical release trimmed or cut scenes that would have fleshed out Achilles' backstory and inner life. Pitt confirmed that this was true. The studio's push for a more action-focused film meant many subtle introspective moments were scaled back or eliminated. This explains why some scenes between Achilles and Briseis, or moments of personal reflection, feel rushed or incomplete. This theory suggested a romantic relationship between Achilles and Patroclus, a reading some fans and scholars argue is supported by the original Iliad and later myth interpretations. While Troy, 2004, didn't explore this angle explicitly, Pitt's recent remarks about wanting to explore Achilles' vulnerability and complex emotions have reopened the door for this interpretation. Though he didn't confirm a romantic relationship, he acknowledged that Achilles' bonds with others were meant to carry emotional weight beyond the battlefield. Another common critique was that Troy downplayed the divine influence central to the original myth. Many fans theorized that the film wanted to ground the story in realism, intentionally leaving out much of the supernatural. Pitt mentioned his skepticism about the gods in his performance, which aligns with this. Achilles, as portrayed by Pitt, is a man who questions and dismisses divine intervention, making the film's approach a conscious choice rather than an oversight. Fans have long debated whether the film's ending, Achilles' death by Paris's arrow, was toned down or altered from the original script to soften the blow for audiences. Pitt didn't directly address this theory, but his comments about studio influence suggest that certain narrative choices, including the ending, were likely shaped by commercial concerns. The goal was to deliver a blockbuster with emotional impact, but not one that was too bleak or controversial. Brad Pitt's candid insights have added clarity to many fan theories, revealing a film caught between artistic ambition and Hollywood pragmatism. The behind-the-scenes tension explains why some storylines feel underdeveloped, while others shine. For fans who always suspected there was more beneath the surface of Troy, Pitt's comments are validation, a signal to revisit the film with fresh eyes and appreciate the subtle complexity that remains. And for those new to the film, this is a great reminder that blockbusters often carry hidden layers, shaped by a myriad of creative forces, compromises, and visions. Years after its release, Troy has left a mark far beyond the battlefield. But how exactly did this epic shape Hollywood's vision of mythic storytelling and transform Brad Pitt's career in the process? The legacy of Troy. When Troy premiered in 2004, It landed with a mix of awe and critique. Audiences were captivated by its sweeping visuals and star power, but many also questioned its narrative depth. Over nearly 2 decades, the film's reputation has evolved, influenced in no small part by Brad Pitt's recent revelations that peel back the layers behind the spectacle. In the early 2000s, Hollywood was in the midst of a renewed fascination with epic storytelling. Gladiator had rekindled interest in historical epics with its gritty, emotional style. Troy sought to continue that momentum, presenting a mythic story on an unprecedented scale with modern cinematic technology. Though Troy didn't quite reach the critical heights of Gladiator, it carved out a unique space by blending ancient myth with blockbuster action. The film's massive battle scenes set new standards for epic choreography, and its sprawling sets influenced many subsequent productions, aiming for authenticity and scale. Troy demonstrated how epic films could marry star-driven storytelling with large-scale spectacle, paving the way for later blockbusters like 300 and Clash of the Titans. Its approach to mixing psychological nuance with sword and sandal drama encouraged filmmakers to think beyond mere visual grandeur. However, Troy also served as a cautionary tale about balancing character depth with spectacle. Filmmakers and studios learned that audiences crave both emotional engagement and thrilling visuals, and striking that balance is key to an epic's lasting success. For Brad Pitt, Troy was more than just another big-budget film, it was a turning point. As we've seen, the role tested his limits physically and emotionally, and the creative compromises forced him to reconsider what kind of projects he wanted to pursue. After Troy, Pitt gravitated toward more artistically driven roles, collaborating with visionary directors like Terrence Malick, The Tree of Life, and the Coen brothers, Burn After Reading. His experiences shaped a renewed focus on quality over scale. Moreover, his move into producing, championing bold and meaningful stories through Plan B Entertainment, arguably reshaped the landscape of modern cinema. Films supported by his company have won numerous awards and pushed forward conversations about race, history, and identity, showing Pitt's commitment to impactful storytelling far beyond his on-screen roles. Thanks in part to Brad Pitt's candid reflections and the rise of streaming platforms, Troy has enjoyed a renaissance among new generations of viewers. Online communities now celebrate the film for its underrated qualities, particularly Pitt's nuanced performance, which is finally receiving the recognition it deserves. Fan theories, video essays, and deep analyses abound, proving that Troy remains a fertile ground for interpretation. It's no longer just a sword and sandal epic. It's a layered work that invites us to rethink heroism, vulnerability, and the human cost of legend. Brad Pitt's revelations have transformed how we see Troy, from a grand but flawed blockbuster into a complicated, fascinating piece of cinematic history. It reminds us that great films aren't just about spectacle or star power, but about the stories behind the stories, the struggles, hopes, and creative battles that shape what reaches the screen. You reached the end of the video. Thanks for staying till the end. For more content like this, subscribe to the channel.